My God and I walk through the meadows few.
My God and I go in the field together. We walk and talk as good friends should and do. We clasp our hands, our voices ring with laughter. My God and I walk through the meadows new.
We clasp our hands, our voices ring with laughter. My God and I walk through the meadows few.
He tells me of the years that went before me, when heavenly plans were made for me to be, when all was but a dream of dim conception, to come to life as verdant glory see.
When all was but a dream of dim conception, to come to life as verdant glory see.
My God and I will go foray together. We'll walk and talk as good friends should and do. This earth will pass, and with it common trifles, but God and I will go unendingly.
This earth will pass, and with it common trifles, but God and I will go unendingly.
The stars shine on the earth. The stars shine on the sea. The stars look up to God. The stars look down on me. The stars will shine for 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000 years and a day. But God and I will live and love when the stars have passed away.
We're continuing in our study in 1 Samuel. We're going to be in chapter 22 tonight. We started watching David on the run as Saul tried to, through the Spirit, Jonathan, and was angry. And so they had come up with a system to communicate if the coast was not clear. And he shot the arrows far and told the message was for David to get out of there for safety. They talked to each other, and then David goes to Nob and goes to the priest. And we see him at that point, we talked a little bit, maybe going through this period where he's striving to trust in God, but his equilibrium's kind of off, and he's trying to figure things out. And he's going through this phase. It seems like his faith is not totally there. And another way to look at it is David. We have in the New Testament a description that Paul uses in Corinthians of the natural man, the carnal man, or the fleshy man. And I think I just dropped, didn't I? Kendall, you got me covered? Okay, Kendall's got my back. And the spiritual man. And he was in the Spirit and did great things for God. But now he's at this point where he's making some self-willed decisions. He's making some choices on his own. He's deciding not to be honest. He's making those choices. There's going to be consequences for that. But it's like he's going through a period where he's fleshy. And we can do that too. We can be very spiritual and have those highs, and then our halos can slip, and we can get to points where we're not making good judgment calls, and we're not doing what's honoring God the most, and we can be fleshy. And some of that's happening, but David's struggling. He's like, why is this happening? I don't even know what's going on. I haven't done anything wrong. And he's lost a lot of things, and he's on the run. And in this chapter tonight, we're going to see that he hit some turning points. And we may sometimes get in those pockets where our faith is weak, where we're not as strong, where we give in to temptation, where we lie, where we run to the enemy camp, where we're not necessarily seeking where God is wanting us to go, where we go through those moments where we're fleshy. The important thing is to get back on track. God is going to be working in him to will and to act according to his purposes. God is going to be working to accomplish his goals. He's going to use the circumstances to do that. And last week, as we talked about all these things that were happening to David, God's agenda is to get David to, others saw a shepherd boy, God saw a king. But David's not quite there yet. And God is going to work in his life for him to will and to act according to his purpose. His purpose is for David to be the king and to be a good king. And we're going to see some things even in this chapter begin to happen that are going to be shaping him and others for that new kingdom, for him being the king of Israel. And there's going to be some turning points where he's going to start moving upward. And we're going to see the other person in the story, Saul, have some turning points that's going to cause him to go further and further in the wrong direction. We can go up or we can go down. We can get closer to God or we can move further away from him. And a lot of it has to do with us. I used to have a poster that said, if God seems far away, guess who moved, right? God's in the same place, guess who moved? And if you're closer to God, guess who moved? We have to make those choices. whether our devotion to God increases or decreases is up to us. And we're going to see not only is God doing His part to will and act according to His purposes. I'm talking about the passage in Philippians chapter 2. But the first part of that is work out your salvation with fear and trembling. David's going to begin to do some things that are turning points for him, and they're going to move him in the right direction. A long time ago, there was we're all familiar with Jeremiah, and he talks about the potter and the clay. There were some books written long time ago about the potter and the clay. One of them I read a long time ago. I don't even know for sure without going back and looking which one it was, because there's some different authors of different books that have that similar titles. But part of the analogy is when a potter is working with clay, there's going to be stages that clay goes through. He takes the clay out, he puts it all together in a lump, he puts it on the wheel, he begins to spin the wheel, he begins to form the pottery. If it mars, he will stop the wheel, he'll try to smooth it out, he'll start the wheel again. If it mars again, he'll try to smooth it out. He'll do that a few times, but if he keeps on marring, resisting his touch. You ever resisted God's touch? If you keep resisting the potter's touch, what's going to happen? He's going to smash it down, form it all together again, and start all over. We've probably all been there. We resisted and resisted and resisted and smashed down and start over. And then you go from the will to the what? To the fire. And then you go from the fire to the shelf. And my least favorite part is the shelf. Sitting on the shelf. David's going to go through the sitting on the shelf. So we're going to see the potter working with the clay. We've seen David kind of resisting a little bit at this beginning of this journey, and now we're going to see him begin to allow God to shape him. We're going to see his heart come back through in color in this chapter. So if you see the number 4, can y'all see the number 4? So that's where he's going to go, to the cave of Adullam. He's going to go to that cave, and then he's going to be, from there he's going to go all the way over here to number 5, which is Mitzvah of Moab, and then he's going to come back to a forest, and we don't really know where that is. Right? So that is quite a journey that we're going to go through in this chapter. And there's going to be several Psalms, Psalm 52, Psalm 54, Psalm 63, and Psalm 142 that, if you look at the heading, they're attributed to this time. And sometimes it's interesting to read some of those Psalms in light of the connection that they may have to this particular chapter. So David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So he's going to be in a cave. What's it like to be in a cave? He's hiding. He's in the cave for protection. A cave can be safe, but it can also be limiting. Remember when the pandemic first happened and we all had to get in the cave? We didn't like being there very long, did we? Caves are not necessarily fun. Some people enjoy caves, and it might be difficult to get out the cave. But David goes to this cave, and so when his brothers and his family and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. So David was not the only one in danger. Who else was in danger? His whole family. Because Saul is on the warpath and Saul can go after anybody he wants to. And so they go to the cave. If you're on the run and you're hiding, isn't it sweet reunion to be reunited with your family? Yeah. So he's in a cave, he's in hiding, and his family comes. Think that's coincidence or providence? God's going to be bringing some things to him that's going to affect him and shape him. God is working in him to willing to act according to his purpose. And when he sees his family, he's going to think about them and their safety. Sometimes when we get stuck spiritually, things that help us get unstuck is when we begin to serve other people. We begin to care about other people. We begin to lead other people. We begin to wait on God. He's in a cave. He doesn't really know what to do or what he's supposed to do, and he's just got to wait for God. He's in the cave and he gets put on the shelf for a little while. And then he's going to begin, then God's going to bring some things to him where he has to respond. His heart has to respond. He either has to step out in faith or he can stay in the cave. Those are some things we're going to see in this chapter. If you get stuck spiritually, you've got to prepare your heart to respond. You have to care about other people. You have to look for opportunities to lead other people. And you just need to wait on God. Trust in God, lean not on your own understanding, acknowledge him in all your ways, and wait for him to direct your steps. That's kind of where David's at. And so, in verse 2 it says, everyone who was, get a load of this, everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was disconnected gathered to him. So he became captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. Coincidence or providence? God brings all these people. 400 men are coming. And what kind of men are they? They're in debt. They're desperate. They're disconnected, and they're in distress. Do we live in a world right now where people are in distress, in debt, and discontent? And where's a place that they should be able to come and get relief and refuge? David's seeking refuge, and God is going to bring something to him where he's going to be a refuge for them. He's going to see people in need, and guess what? David knows how to help people that are distressed, people that are disconnected. And God's going to give him that opportunity. And he's going to rise to the occasion. He becomes their what? Their captain. He steps up. He was running initially away from Saul, and what was he doing? He's trying to figure things out on his own. Now he's beginning, all these people are coming, and they're going to become his mighty men. And in chapter 23, it's going to grow from 400 to 600. And then we're going to see sometimes the 400 go somewhere and 200 stay here, but we're going to see that group kind of stay the same. But these are people that have something in common. They're distressed. They're in debt. And they're disconnected. They're disconnected. Why are they in debt? Who told them when they wanted a king so bad? Who told them you're going to get in debt? Samuel told them. God's telling them through Samuel, you're going to get a king, and you're going to be taxed for this and that, and they're being taxed, and if you don't pay your taxes, they come after you and they come after your family, so they're on the run because they're in debt. And they're distressed. Guess who's their king? Look at the political situation that they're in. And they're disconnected. Now, if you get 400 people, all of them, all these people are like that, that could cause trouble, right? But David's going to lead them in a different direction. Somebody asked the question last week about, I think you were asking about, was David alone when he was with the priest? And if you look in Samuel, it's kind of hard to tell, but why would we think that he wasn't alone, that there were people there with him, maybe not right there at the moment, but that he wasn't lying about other people being with him? Any thoughts? What's that? The amount of food? Well, I mean, 5 loaves or whatever, okay? Because when Jesus recounts the story, what does he say? David and his companions. So, I mean, I thought about that later, not at in the moment, but if that helps any. Okay. So, then David went from there to Mizpah of Moab and said to the king of Moab. So, now is this a mistake? Where's he going? Enemy. Moab's the enemy, right? Now, what's the difference between Gath and going to Moab? Because he goes and says, please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me. So he still doesn't really know. But now, he doesn't know what the future holds, but he knows who holds the future. He's putting his trust in God. But why Moab? He takes his family there to a safe place. He doesn't want them on the run with him. He wants them to go to a safe place, and he takes them to Moab. Any connection between David's family and Moab? David is a great-grandson of Ruth. From Moab, right? And so there had to be some connection with family, and he takes them there, and so he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. So David's in a stronghold. He's in a safe place. All these men are coming to him. There was movement. There was excitement. There was people sharing stories and encouraging each other. And there were people making some turning points in their own life. They came here one way, but now they're becoming the mighty men of God. And things are moving. It's always nice when things get moving, right? When doors open and things begin to change, things are happening. Now, a prophet of Gad said to David, he's in a stronghold, he's safe, and Gad, who's Gad? Where's Gad come from? What's that? Okay. And we don't know much about Gad, do we? We know later on in 2 Samuel and in Chronicles, he's going to come back, and when he kind of gets on to David when he's numbering the people, and we're going to see him some later on down the road. But here a man of God shows up with a message for David and says, do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go to the land of Judah. So David departed and went to the forest of Hereth. So, what kind of heart does David have now? He gets a word from God, leave the safe place, leave the stronghold. That doesn't sound smart right now. There's a madman on the loose wanting to kill him, and he's in a safe place. And God says, leave the safe place and go closer to where the enemy is. Go get closer to Saul. You want to take that trip? But sometimes God calls us to move from the place of safety to the place we need to be. Because God was working and doing some things in David's life, and he couldn't do them unless David moved. Sometimes we want to play it safe, but we need to do what God asked us to do. We need to be willing to move. He had a responsive heart at this point. That's a turning point. When you and I have responsive hearts to God, when we look into His Word and it tells us things and we respond to it and we do it, we're going to see turning points in our life. We're going to move from where we are to a better place if we're following God. If we're not following God, we're going to move from where we are to a worse place. We're going to see that in Saul. But he responds the right way. How do you respond to God's will in your life? Sometimes we kick and we complain. We don't always respond well, especially to change. He's been on the run. He's in a safe place. Leave me alone. Don't touch me. I'm good. I got all these people. He's content. His family's safe. He's safe. But the prophet says, don't stay here. Go. And what does he do? Go.
Well, do you think it's possible, in a sense, I mean, it's supposition, but like you said, Providence brings these people to David that now he's going to lead. And when he's by himself or with a very small group of people, maybe he's thinking more about himself. Maybe by giving him people to lead, perhaps he thinks more, he's responsible for them too, and maybe it helps his, God giving us what we need, not what we want, but that maybe David needed some responsibility to help him with those judgments that he made.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes the comment is that God, in God's providence, sometimes He brings things to us that will cause us to rise up and be focused on things that help us move in the right direction. Because when he was in that period where he was kind of struggling, his focus was much more about trying to figure things out. And he thought he had his purpose, and he lost all that purpose. And when you don't have purpose anymore, that's difficult. But now God's given him new purpose. God's beginning to move things toward him, and he's using his gifts. I believe he's using his gifts to serve other people. And that's important. In fact, there's a verse, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, use whatever gifts you have to serve one another. If it's speaking, speak. If it's serving, serve. God designed us to use our abilities to serve people. We're going to find we're at our best when we do that. So God's moving him along. But now the music changes. It's much more dark because now we're going to be with Saul for a little bit. So it says, when Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, now Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah with a spear in his hand, and his servants standing around about him. Saul's always got his spear, doesn't he? Always got the ability to make his point. And he heard that David... And so, why did Gath tell him to leave? Could have been that Saul found out where he was. And so God is providentially moving David where he needs to be. Because he needs to be somewhere else, and because maybe he needs to be out of safety. But as God leads David, and David experiences his leading, there's this trust that goes on. When you and I put our faith fully in God and trust Him, He delivers. And the more we do that, the more confident we get. How did Abraham get to a point that he could offer his son? Those faith exchanges that took place. How did Jacob get where he got? It took time. It took a while. But we're no different. And then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, you Benjamites." So evidently the circle that's right around him are Benjamites. Now you could possibly say that Saul has been spinning so much in a downward spiral that he's losing his sphere of influence. It's getting smaller. David's is doing what? Getting bigger. People are running away from Saul, and they're running to something new. And he's going to complain to them, "Will the son of Jesse..." So he's making an argument for them to get on his side so that they will be with him as he goes against David. "Will the son of Jesse," doesn't even mention his name, "give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make all of you captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me, and there was no one who reveals to me that my son, who made a covenant with the son of Jesse, and there is not one of you who is sorry for me, or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait all this day." So Saul is the guy that's laying in wait for David, and he's accusing David of laying in wait for him. Everything is upside down and backwards with Saul. And he's feeling sorry for himself, and he wants other people to feel sorry for him, and nobody feels sorry for him. And so that's where his mindset is. And as he's talking to them about, "Hey, David will never do these things for you. You need to be on my team." Now he's in a kind of a helpless, sad situation. He's trying to rally up the people that are left, and their hearts aren't there. And Doeg, who saw David go to Ahimelech, speaks up in verse 9 and says, "Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servant of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse go to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So the king sent a call to Ahimelech the priest, and the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, and the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the king. And King Saul said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here I am, Lord. So he's coming to the king. He doesn't know what is going to happen or what Saul is going to confront him with. He thought David represented things and everything was okay, and he looked out for David, who was special in the kingdom, Saul's son-in-law, he doesn't know all the things that are coming. And Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me and lie in wait, as it is this day?" So Ahimelech answered the king and said, "And who among all your servants is as faithful as David?" Maybe not the best thing to say. Okay. "Who is the king's son-in-law, and who goes at your bidding, and is honorable in all your house?" I mean, he's telling him the truth. Probably Saul doesn't want to hear that. "Did I then begin to inquire of the Lord for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or anything in the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all this, little or much." He's telling the truth. He didn't know all this. He's pleading his case. And the king said, "You shall die." Saul doesn't listen to him at all. He's made his mind up that he's conspired with David, and he's so paranoid, he just wants him dead. "You shall die, Ahimelech, you and your father's house." Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priest of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me." So you guys knew that he ran away, and you didn't come and tell me. Well, they didn't know anything was wrong. All of the people around Saul are listening to what Ahimelech is saying, but the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priest of the Lord, because the priests of the Lord were what? Consecrated. It wasn't the right thing to do, and so they don't do it. Has there ever been a time that Saul made a command to kill somebody and the people said no? Yeah, Jonathan. He wanted to kill Jonathan, and the people said no. So Saul's supposed to be their leader, but he's not their leader. They see that this isn't the right thing to do. And then the king said to Doeg, "Turn and kill the priest." Doeg is an opportunist. He wants to do anything he can for his benefit and his relationship with Saul. And so Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priest and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. So these are guys that are in the priesthood. He kills 85 of them. Also, Nob, the city of priests, he struck down with the edge of the sword both men and women, children, and nursing infants. Horrible, terrible, disgusting. Oxen, donkeys, sheep with the edge of the sword. So they just go on a killing spree. This is the king of God's people. And Doeg executes these priests and these people. Now when the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. And so one of them gets away, and David's going to get the message. But what is significant about all these priests dying? Go ahead.
Goes back to David's life.
Okay.
If the priest had known that David was running from Saul, if nothing else, he would at least know not to go say to him, "Hey, he's your best guy." But in that sense, David probably thought his life was a victimless sin. It's going to end up that his words are going, now Saul's still responsible for all this, but still David's lie puts these priests in greater jeopardy.
Okay.
And they didn't know what they were walking into.
Okay? So there's a consequence to David's sin. Is there such a thing as a non-consequential sin? Huh? Sin has consequences. We can sometimes justify sin. We can sometimes think it's okay. We can sometimes think we'll get away with it. We sometimes think, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. This is just a little lie. This is a little white lie. This is no big deal. But are there no non-consequential sins? I think sins have consequences. And that affects us too, spiritually. But anything else connected to this and the priest? What was told by the man of God to Eli when he was telling him that God was going to bring some punishment on his family back in Samuel chapter 2, that he was going to cut off a lot of these priests and they weren't going to get to an old age. And so the priests that were in Nob were descendants of Eli. And in chapter 2, verse 31, that's where that statement is made. And this is part of the demise of that branch of the priesthood that is Ithamar, the branch of the of Aaron's priesthood. And later on in 1 Chronicles chapter 24, David's going to find just 8 chiefs from this branch, and he's going to find 16 from Eleazar's branch from Zadok. So that might not mean much to you, but there was a prophet who said some things were going to happen, and now we see some of those things come to fulfillment. When God says things are going to happen, things will happen. And so Abiathar escapes and flees to David, and Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priest. What do you think David's response is going to be? Okay, he felt guilty. I caused all that. Heartbroken. And he takes responsibility. He holds himself accountable. Is that the right response? Yes, it's the right response. He's making turning points. He's responding the right way. He doesn't try to defend it. What would Saul do in that case? Okay, blame everyone else. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me. Do not fear. For he who seeks my life seeks your life. But with me you shall be safe. And now he feels a sense of debt, a sense of responsibility to keep someone else safe. And this relationship is going to be somewhat reciprocated because he's going to rely on the priest to give him direction in chapter 23 when he's going to go to the next city to determine should he go there or not. He's going to get the priest to tell him with the ephod and the, possibly with the Urim and Thummim, the way that they're able, when they inquire of the Lord, how they get direction from God. But David is now going to be seeking God and moving in that direction. So in Philippians chapter 2, which I've already referred to, it says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to do for His good pleasure." We see that God is working in David's life for him to willing to act according to His good pleasure. But we also see David working out things in his life. There's always our part and God's part. Sometimes we want it just to be about God's part, but it's not. There's our part and there's God's part. There was David's part and there was God's part. There was Saul's part. And what did he do? He kept pulling away from God. David is turning and moving toward God. And what got him going in that direction? He began to take the things that God brought to him and laid in his path, and he began to respond to them the way he believed God should. People came, he led. People were disconnected, in debt, distressed, and he cared. A priest runs away, and now he says, "You be here in safety." His family comes, and he takes them to a place of safety. He begins to exercise the right muscles in service to others. And sometimes when we have no direction, when we don't know where we need to go spiritually, sometimes the best thing we can do is ask ourselves the question, what's the loving thing to do? What's the servant-hearted thing to do? Sometimes when I don't know which end is up, grab the towel. Start washing feet, symbolically, of course. But there's something to that. And this story kind of emphasizes that. Don't be selfish. Don't exercise self-pity. Don't run away from God, Saul. Run to God. Be selfless. Look for the opportunities. And God's beginning to shape things, and He's building David up in a way he never could have gotten to where he's going to get in Saul's kingdom. God's going to use these opportunities to shape him like a potter with clay. And God's no different in your life. God's looking for opportunities to get you to move, to make a turn in a new direction. Don't stay in the cave. The cave had its purpose. But there was a time you have to get out of the cave. I mean, it'd be nice living on a mountaintop, free from the world, not having to deal with all its stuff. I used to be an old contemporary Christian song, living on the mountaintop, singing with the Lord. Wouldn't that be great? But sometimes you got to come down from the mountain to the people below. That's what God designed us. We can't live on a mountaintop. We can't stay in the cave. We can't live in a perfect bubble. We're going to have to deal with the messiness of life and look for the opportunities God gives you and serve Him. And Jesus, when He's given His message, He says things like, "Seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." We have lots of purposes as God's people. God's given David some purposes to get him out of the rut that he was in and get him moving in the right direction. And God works in our lives that way too. And we should be asking God to work in our lives. God, show me the direction I need to go. I say these words often when I pray. Give me clarity. Help me see clearly. Give me wisdom. But we should be seeking to move forward. Paul says, "I forget what's behind and I press on to what's ahead." What's involved in that pressing?
Rusty talked to us Sunday about the man looking in the mirror and walking away and forgetting who he was or what he looked like. The things that happen here, God's providence allows David to remember who he is. He's gone from someone who's running scared to now he's saying, he's now leading a group of people, and now he's saying to this priest, hey, we have the same enemy. If you stay here with me, you'll be safe. And so he's taking the responsibility of this man's safety. David's going back to, he's remembering who he is. He's remembering the character that made him that one that would be chosen to start with.
Yeah. And David, when he leaves his parents, he says, you know, I want them to be safe until I know what God's, now he's open to God's direction. And God wants us to be open to His direction. Will we respond? And whatever we withhold from God, He's going to keep on testing. Whatever you withhold is going to get tested. If you pull back from God, He's going to come back to get you to let go. That's the way God works. Whatever you withhold is going to get tested. Don't withhold anything from God. That's what Christianity is about. Seeking His will. Christ died so that we don't live for ourselves, but for Him who died for us and is risen again. 2 Corinthians 5:15. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for your love for us. Thank you for the text. Thank you for revealing things to us sometimes that remind us of the importance of us just being like clay in your hands. May we yield to you and allow you to shape us and move us in directions in our lives that we will grow and mature spiritually, and that we will be instruments in your hand, especially, Father, to make a difference in the lives of people that are distressed and in debt and disconnected. And we pray that you'll use us to connect the disconnected, that you'll help us to have a burning desire for lost souls in our hearts, and that you'll help us here at Midway to be a church that reaches out and serves other people. Help us to keep our eyes on Jesus and follow Him wherever He leads us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Jackie's going to...
The chimes of time ring up the news, another day is through. Someone slipped and fell. Was that someone you? You may have longed for added strength, your courage to renew. Do not be disheartened, for I have news for you. It is no secret what God can do, what He's done for others, He'll do for you. With arms wide open, He'll pardon you. It is no secret what God can do. There is no night, for in His light you'll never walk alone. Always feel at home wherever you may roam. There is no power can conquer you while God is on your side. Just take Him at His promise. Don't run away. see